Industrial Society and Its Future by Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber. A rather incendiary tract, you might say. Rimshot, please. So, this was the manifesto of the Unabomber. He sent this manuscript, I believe, to some pretty notable periodicals here in America, like the Washington Post and/or the New York Times or something along those lines, with the promise, I believe, to desist in his campaign of terror if it was published, which it was. However, it was the publication of this manuscript which actually led to the Unabomber's apprehension, as his family, I believe, recognized certain linguistic hallmarks in the writing, and they were ultimately able to identify the Unabomber as being Ted Kaczynski. Now, this is a pretty interesting read, and not merely because of its authorship and the circumstances surrounding its publication, but also because the contents of this work and the perspective from which this work was written is pretty radical, you might say. Actually, it's very radical. But anyway, so being as this is a political manifesto, it's probably important to try to pin down as best as possible what Ted Kaczynski's actual political viewpoints are in this. And I think his outlook could best be described as a form of eco fascism. So, opening the work with the rather explosive, pun intended, and highly debatable line, the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Kaczynski proceeds to set out his thesis that modern industrial technological society has robbed human beings largely of their agency, even while providing them with many amenities and distractions, and has fostered certain adverse psychological effects upon the human population. And ultimately, the only solution is to tear it all down, to overthrow the system and revert society to, I suppose, a pre industrial level of technological development, like a 16th or 17th century type society, I suppose. That's the gist of the work. It's hardly original. I mean, this is a view which is not unique to the Unabomber by any means, but it is laid out pretty well, honestly. And this is I have to say, a pretty well constructed work as far as manifestos go. But anyway, so that's the main overview of industrial society and its future. And I have to say, once again, Kaczynski's perspective in this is pretty interesting and very radical again. But throughout the work, he evinces a kind of view which I think is to some extent likenable or akin to Marxism, but it differs ultimately in its conclusions. So, throughout this manifesto, Kaczynski demonstrates a very intensive preoccupation with what Marxists might call the material productive forces, that is, technology and machinery and these kinds of economic factors and modes of production, and ultimately the transformative effects that they have upon human society. But where he differs from Marxism is that Marxism ultimately seeks to retain these advanced material productive forces, but to reconfigure the manner of their use and transform the society in which they are used. Whereas Kaczynski, on the other hand, states that you can't reform industrial society. It is bad in and of itself, and that these machines, these technologies, need to be abolished and done away with, and that society needs to be reverted to pre-industrial levels of technological advancement. Throughout the work, he states that human freedom has been greatly restricted through the advance of technology. and that it has led to imbalances of power, inequalities of power in society, as like governments can use like surveillance technology, which the average person does not have, and also corporations have very like devious advertising methods and whatnot and all that kind of stuff, and that ultimately much of society has been reduced to the level of worker drones, and that there is no real avenue for true fulfillment, according to him anyway, in society. And so we have to tear it all down, destroy the machines, and go back to the good old days of pre-industrial society, I suppose. Now, I myself would not in any way, shape, or form agree with this, even though I do understand his perspective. And once again, I would commend him for the manner of its presentation, which is quite commendable, honestly. Although I really just I don't really jive with this view because, again, that opening line, the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Again, that is incredibly debatable. But also, his view that human freedom has been negatively impacted by industrial society, I would also have to contest, because I would say that industrial society is the actual product of unfettered human freedom. Because modern industrial society, the Industrial Revolution, was the outcome of the liberalism which was spawned by the Enlightenment. Liberalism, root word there being liberty, freedom, as the old mercantilist economic restrictions were rolled back, and the average citizen was given much more leeway and power to exercise their own will. This is what led to the Industrial Revolution. And again, Kaczynski highlights the inequalities of power in society, but again, this is just a consequence of human freedom. That's the thing. Freedom and equality are really antithetical concepts. Freedom creates inequality, and equality restrains freedom, I would say. So you can say certainly that, he did say, obviously, that human freedom has been negatively impacted by technology, but I would say, contrarily, that these technologies and modern industrial society was created by unfettered human freedom. So I don't really agree with his basic like premise here. But also, I just, maybe it's me. Maybe I really have just read like too much Ayn Rand, perhaps. But this type of like romantic primitivism, which Kaczynski espouses in this work, I just don't get down with. I really don't. Like, does anyone really want to go back to pre industrial civilization? You can say that modern life is hollow and soulless, and we're all just worker drones, our lives are meaningless, we have no more power. I would contest much of that, but like the alternative which Kaczynski advocates for in this work is just not enticing to me in the slightest. Like the good old days to the Unabomber are apparently when the infant mortality rate was damn near 80%. The average lifespan was like 55. That doesn't seem too terribly appealing to me personally. So there are a lot of pitfalls. I get it, in modern industrial society, but yeah, I would still choose modern industrial society. I'll take my Netflix and my car and my indoor plumbing, even if that makes me some kind of sellout. I will take that any day over being mauled to death by a bear and trying to farm land with a shovel and a hoe. I'll take modern industrial society myself. But again, this work is once again pretty interesting, and Kaczynski, his position is very radical, both from the perspective of the left and the right, because he criticizes both ends of the political spectrum in here. He criticizes the right for basically enabling the creation of industrial society with, like economic laissez-faire, the liberalism which created the modern industrial society. and their drive for the drive on the right for like greater economic efficiency and kind of the eye only on the bottom line. But he also criticizes the left, and in fact, I would say his harshest criticisms are reserved for the left, whom he characterizes as being comprised of what you might call, what I believe C.S. Lewis might have called moral busybodies, that are kind of people uh, who have been robbed of like real like power over their own lives, again according to Kaczynski, and who have to sublimate their desire for some kind of agency by investing in these causes and these crusades like civil rights, gay rights, feminism, that kind of thing. And he's pretty harsh against that, really. In fact, he devotes quite a bit of time to discussing leftism and its modern varieties. And it's a very radical perspective, both from the left and the right. It's basically just kind of castigating everyone who makes use of and enables technological advancement and industrial society. But as I said earlier, I think you could safely categorize Kaczynski's political outlook as a form of eco-fascism. And I would actually like to read some excerpts out of the work, which I think illustrate that pretty well. So in paragraph 86, and by the way, the work is composed of numbered paragraphs, and there's actually quite a bit of internal cross-referencing in this thing. Again, the presentation is actually pretty good, but in paragraph 86, Kaczynski writes, but even if most people in industrial technological society were well satisfied, we would still be opposed to that form of society because, among other reasons, we consider it demeaning to fulfill one's need for the power process through surrogate activities or through identification with an organization rather than through pursuit of real goals. So, in other words, Ted Kaczynski, have unilaterally decided what all other people are to rightfully pursue in their lives. And it does not matter whether anyone else is fulfilled in modern industrial society. No one can be happy unless I am happy, and I will oppose modern industrial society, even if everybody else is satisfied by it. Again, it's putting the fascism in eco-fascism, because he's saying only my desires matter. Everybody else is deluded. I'm the only one out here outside of the matrix looking in, trying to wake you people up. It doesn't matter if you're perfectly happy and content with your lives. Your lives are meaningless and hollow according to me. In my opinion, is the only one that counts. Again, once again, putting the fascism in eco-fascism. But keeping that little paragraph, that little excerpt there in mind, I would like to read from the ending of Industrial Society and Its Future, because it ends on one whopper of a tone-deaf note. So here at the end of the work, he is arguing against what he refers to as over-socialized types. And he says, over-socialized types who try to satisfy their drive for power by imposing their morality on everyone have certainly been around for a long time. Gee, Ted, you mean like you did? Over-socialized types who try to satisfy their drive for power by imposing their morality on everyone. Again, you mean like you did? You mean like you did by blowing people up and going on a campaign of terror through mail bombing in order to get this manifesto in front of people's eyes so that you could persuade them to your very radical form of thinking. Again, that really did actually like make me chuckle to myself whenever I reached the end of the work there, because that was from the last paragraph. We got to the end where he was railing against the over-socialized types who try to impose their morality on everyone. Just like you did, Ted. Just like you did, Ted, trying to impose your own little radical viewpoint upon everybody else through violence. Again, putting the fascism in eco-fascism. But Anyway, so that is my review, I suppose, of Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber's manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future. It is, once again, a very interesting read, even though it's something that I strongly disagree with. But this work has resonated. It really has. And you can see that very quickly if you go on like Goodreads and look at reviews of this work. And, you know, Ted Kaczynski is often kind of romanticized uh, because I would say that the Unabomber is perhaps the closest thing we have had, I guess, to like Hannibal Lecter, I suppose. He was a very intelligent and educated man who did some horrible things due to an ideological outlook. Um, but people, again, a lot of people tend to kind of romanticize him, and once more, you can see this very clearly if you just look through some of the reviews of this book. But I would strongly caution against that. Yes, Ted Kaczynski was an intelligent man. Yes, he was educated. He was sophisticated to some extent, but he still did. He still committed very evil deeds and took human life. And I don't think that it's wise to like romanticize that type of person, even if you might can identify with where they're coming from. But yeah, so Industrial Society and Its Future by Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber. Have you read this manifesto? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with it or with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read this, I don't know, you might want to read this. It's not terribly long. You can probably read this fairly quickly. And again, it's laid out very well. I really do have to commend him for the presentation of his ideas, even though I disagree with them. He definitely laid it out pretty well. And you know, it's a very radical viewpoint, which I think most people would probably not be inclined to agree with. Even the people that like pretend that they do. Again, there are a lot of people out there that will like champion this and be like, yeah, Ted was right, tear down the system, destroy the machines. But then like, would they really want that? Like, would they really want that? Would you really want to go back to fighting bears with spears and bows and trying to farm with a hoe and a rake? Like, would you really want that? So this is a work that it's definitely, I would say, an outre mindset on display. But you know, it is of interest if nothing else. So, like I say, you might want to pick this up and give this a go. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.